The myth everyone repeats. Everyone told Cade the same thing. 90% of restaurants fail in the first year. His dad said it at dinner, setting his fork down like he was delivering a verdict. His old manager said it in the parking lot, like a warning shot, right before Cade's last shift. A guy at a wedding he barely knew said it too, completely unprompted, somewhere between the toast and the second round of drinks, like it was small talk. One detail nobody had checked. That number is fake. Not exaggerated, fake. It came from a commercial. It came from an American Express ad years ago with no study behind it. And Cade didn't find that out before he quit his job. He found it out after, standing in an empty dining room at 11 at night, mopping a floor nobody had walked on all day, wondering if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. This is that story. Not a highlight reel. The real first year. The real numbers. And the myth that almost stopped him before he even started. Who was Cade before any of this? Cade was 26, working as a shift supervisor at a mid-size hotel restaurant. Decent pay, boring work, the kind of job where you already know what the schedule looks like 6 months out before you've lived it. He'd saved close to $40,000 over 4 years, living cheap, driving an old Civic with a check engine light he'd learned to ignore, skipping vacations his friends took every summer, and eating the same 3 meals on rotation because he'd priced them out to the dollar. He wasn't reckless about it. He tracked every dollar in a spreadsheet, with a tab labeled cushion, and one tab, half joking at first, labeled if it all goes wrong. He had a plan. A small place with 28 seats, serving breakfast and lunch only, with no dinner service, no liquor license, and minimal overhead. He wrote it on his phone during breaks, in the Notes app, over 8 months, adding a line here, deleting a line there, and second-guessing the name of the place more than once before settling on something simple. He ran the numbers on 3 different possible locations before picking one, comparing foot traffic estimates he mostly guessed at by standing on each corner at 7 in the morning, counting people with a tally on his phone like it was a scientific instrument. The idea didn't come out of nowhere. He'd worked hotel kitchens for 5 years and kept noticing the same thing. The morning shift was always slammed. Guests wanted a real breakfast, not a bagged pastry off the lobby cart, and there wasn't a single sit-down breakfast spot within walking distance of 3 different hotels in that part of town. He wasn't chasing a dream so much as noticing a gap nobody had bothered to fill. He mentioned the idea to a hotel regular once, almost as a joke, and the man told him flatly he'd be there every morning if it existed. Cade wrote that down too, in the same Notes app, like evidence. Everyone had an opinion. Most of them were bad. His uncle told him restaurants are a rich man's hobby, not a poor man's business. A guy from culinary school messaged him out of nowhere just to say, "You know most of these places don't make it a year, right?" His own mother, gently, asked him 3 separate times over one dinner if he was sure, like maybe the 4th time would finally get through to him. Cade knew the stat everyone kept repeating, 90%. He'd heard it his whole life, on television, from teachers, from strangers at parties who said it with the confidence of someone quoting a law of physics. He almost let it stop him. Almost. There was one night, about 2 weeks before he signed anything, where he genuinely considered dropping the whole plan. He sat in his car outside his parents' house after that dinner, doing the math on staying at the hotel job for another 5 years instead, running the numbers on a promotion that hadn't even been offered to him yet. It felt safer on paper for about 4 minutes. Then he thought about the tally marks on his phone from that morning on the corner and put the car in drive instead of going back inside to say he'd changed his mind. What the actual research says. Then he did something most people skip entirely. He actually looked for where that number came from. He spent one night instead of doom scrolling, digging through actual research instead of blog posts repeating the same line. Turns out, the 90% figure traces back to a television commercial from the early 2000s, an ad for a credit card company with no study behind it at all. Nobody ever measured it. Somebody just said it, and it stuck, because it sounded dramatic and nobody checked. The real numbers, once he found them, told a calmer story. Researchers at UC Berkeley tracked more than 80,000 independently owned restaurants using Bureau of Labor Statistics data. The real first-year failure rate? Around 17%. Not 90. 17. A separate study out of Cornell, led by a researcher named H.G. Parser, tracked restaurants differently and found something a little higher, around 26% closing or changing hands in year one. Two respected studies, two different numbers, and Cade noticed that too. He didn't just pick the lower one because it felt better. He sat with both and figured the truth was probably somewhere in that range, nowhere close to the myth everyone kept repeating like gospel. But there was a second number in that same research that mattered more, and almost nobody talks about it. By year 3, the business faced a much more difficult reality. Cornell's data showed roughly 60% of restaurants gone by then, not year 1, year 3. That's the real risk, not the opening. The middle years, the stretch where the excitement of opening the business had worn off, but the bills kept coming. Cade read that number twice, out loud, sitting alone at his kitchen table at nearly 1 in the morning, and felt something shift in how he was thinking about the whole plan. The danger wasn't the leap. It was the long stretch of ordinary weeks after the leap that nobody warns you about. The first few months. Cade didn't fully appreciate that second part yet. He just knew the first-year number wasn't the monster he'd been told it was. So he signed a lease on a narrow space that used to be a dry cleaner, still smelling faintly of chemicals nobody could fully scrub out, no matter how many coats of paint went over the walls. He quit his job with no ceremony, just a 2-week notice and a manager who barely looked up from his screen, already scheduling someone else into Cade's shifts before he'd even finished the sentence. Month 1 was chaos, but the good kind. Friends showed up, family showed up, some of them twice in the same week, ordering things they didn't even want just to pad the receipt. The kind of crowd that comes because they love you, not because they love your food yet. Revenue looked fine on paper. Cade thought quietly, maybe I'm going to be one of the lucky ones. He even let himself imagine a second location, briefly, sketching it in the same notes app, before catching himself and deleting it, a little embarrassed at how far ahead he'd gotten. Where it started to slip. Month 3 is when it turned. The friends and family crowd dried up, the way it always does once the novelty wears off. Regular customers hadn't replaced them yet, because regular customers didn't know he existed. He'd spent almost his entire opening budget on equipment and build-out, on an espresso machine that looked beautiful, and a walk-in cooler that cost more than his old car. Nothing left over for marketing. He'd assumed, the way a lot of first-time owners do, that good food would just advertise itself. It didn't. Foot traffic on his block was thin to begin with, and a hand-painted sign in the window wasn't pulling anyone off the main road 2 blocks away. He remembers standing in the doorway some mornings, watching people walk past on the other side of the street without even glancing over, and feeling something close to invisible. The night in the parking lot. By month 5, his savings account had gone from 40,000 to under 6. He was paying himself nothing, some weeks skipping his own rent payment and covering it late with a fee attached, telling himself it was temporary. He remembers doing inventory alone at midnight, counting eggs by hand because the software felt like one more expense he couldn't justify, doing math in his head that kept landing on the same bad number no matter how he rearranged it. He told one friend, just one, that he thought he was going to have to close. Saying it out loud felt like defeat, even though nothing had actually closed yet. That night, he sat in his car in the empty lot for almost 20 minutes before driving home, not doing anything, just sitting there, watching the sign above the door go dark on its automatic timer, thinking about how much of his savings that sign alone had cost to install. By any normal measure, this is where the story should have ended. It nearly did. The ordinary thing that changed it. What changed wasn't a miracle. It was boring, honestly, which is probably why it worked. A regular customer, an older woman named Ellen, who came in most mornings for coffee and eggs and always sat at the same corner stool, asked him one day why she'd never seen the place online. Cade didn't really have an answer. He'd been so focused on the kitchen, he'd basically ignored the internet entirely, like posting a photo of an omelette was somehow beneath the actual work. She helped him set up a simple business page on her lunch break, nothing fancy, and told him one rule: post real photos, not stock images, and actually respond when people comment, even the annoying ones. He started posting the morning prep, the eggs going into the pan, the coffee getting poured, and the regulars, by name and with their permission, telling small stories about why the biscuit recipe was his grandmother's and nobody else's. Nothing polished. It looks like a normal person's phone, because it was, and that turned out to be exactly the point. Within 6 weeks, foot traffic from the surrounding blocks started climbing, slowly at first, then in a way he could actually see on the receipts, a handful of new faces every week who mentioned, almost sheepishly, that they'd seen a post about the biscuits. He also did something small but specific, something Ellen didn't even suggest. He partnered with 2 nearby offices to deliver lunch trays twice a week, at a modest discount, just to get his food in front of people who'd never once walked past his door. That single move brought in roughly $1,800 a month, consistently, month after month, which doesn't sound huge until you remember his monthly gap at the time was smaller than that number. He also started keeping a small notebook by the register, jotting down which items sold out first each morning, and quietly cut 2 menu items that were costing him money nobody had ever ordered anyway. Where he landed by year 1. By month 9, he was breaking even. By month 12, the 1-year mark everyone had warned him about, he wasn't just still open, he was slightly profitable, for the first time. About $1,100 that month after paying himself a small salary, the first paycheck he'd written himself in almost a year that didn't feel like theft from the business. That's not a rags to riches ending. It's smaller than that and more honest. Cade didn't beat the 90% myth because that myth was never real to begin with. What he actually beat was the middle-year mortality curve, the 60%, by doing the unglamorous thing. Fixing his marketing before he ran out of runway instead of after it. The part most videos leave out. Something worth saying plainly, because most videos skip it. Undercapitalization is the actual killer here, not bad food. Study after study points to owners running out of cash before the business has time to find its customers, not owners who couldn't cook. Cade nearly became that statistic for one specific, avoidable reason. He built a beautiful kitchen and left nothing in the budget for anyone to find out it existed. The food was never the problem. Nobody knew the food existed. I'll be honest about something else too. I don't think Cade was smart at every single step. And I don't think this story is proof that hard work always wins, because that's not really true either. I think he got lucky that Ellen cared enough to say something over eggs on an otherwise unremarkable morning. Many owners don't get an Ellen. Some brilliant restaurants close anyway, for reasons that have nothing to do with effort. That's not a motivational point, it's simply an honest one. Recognizing that luck can play a role in these stories makes them more realistic, not less inspiring. The belief that success comes only from effort is just another myth, one not so different from the 90% statistic. What I do think is true is this. Cade gave himself a chance to obtain luck by staying open long enough for an Ellen to show up at all. If he had quit in month 5, in that parking lot, none of it would occur. Luck still needed something to land on, and Cade had kept the business alive long enough for those opportunities to reach him. What to actually do with this? So if you're sitting where Cade sat, staring at a business plan and a scary statistic somebody heard secondhand, do the thing he eventually did, just earlier than he did it. Go find the actual number before you let a fake one make the decision for you. And if you've already opened the doors, don't just make good food and wait for people to find it. Somebody has to know you're there, and it usually isn't going to be you who figures out how, alone, at midnight, over a spreadsheet, second-guessing every line item you've already committed to. Cade's restaurant is still open, now 3 years after it began. Not a chain, not viral, just a 28-seat room on a quiet block, with a corner stool that still Ellens whenever she wants it, that almost closed in month 5 and didn't.